The text explains the elaboration likelihood model, which asks the question, is it likely that the receptor will elaborate on the message? There are two routes to process, the central one, which requires considerable cognitive elaboration, and the peripheral one, where people process superficially and instead focus on peripheral cues such as speaking style, physical appearance, or music. The two main factors that determine each route are motivation and ability. The more highly involved an individual is with an issue, the more likely they are to be motivated to engage deeper with it and to value stronger arguments over weak ones or peripheral cues. Another factor is our cognitive ability and our knowledge on the matter, which makes us more or less involved. And also, need for cognition is a determining factor. This is basically if individuals like to think deeper or not, and this will lead them to either central or peripheral processing. The most complex part of this model is the multiple functions notion, which basically implies that the same factor can be a peripheral cue, an argument, or a catalyst for thinking under different contexts. This is the most criticized part of this model, as it makes it unfalsifiable.
We can find many points in common between last week's lecture and this article. Firstly, we have to remember the empirical experimental studies made on mass communication effects by Carl Holland. To make an understanding that persuasion isn't just a stimuli-response process, but also has a neuropsychological process, both texts are opposed to the idea that media is direct to the public and that will always change attitudes. But it's also important to note that we found differences in between the texts. For example, on one hand, the lecture talks about the structure of messages, which has a rhetorical design, based on opposing ideas, like one-sided or two-sided messages. But on the other hand, the article believes in the cognitive impact of argument quality and heuristics. Also, both texts talk about the cognitive ability of the individual to its education. While the article says that the more knowledge you have, the less probabilities there are for you to be persuaded, the lecture nuanced it with its level of involvement and the need for cognition.
Early media theories were based on the hypothermic needle concept that viewed audiences as a passive and vulnerable group. However, this perception was overly simplistic. According to Perloff's elaboration, likelihood model of persuasion, there are two ways of persuasion: the central route, which considers careful thinking of the arguments, and the peripheral route, which employs shortcuts such as the popularity of the source or expertise in persuasive persuasion. Eli Parser adds that algorithms determine what a person is exposed to through personalization, resulting in a filter bubble. Hence, the topical issues presented to users are content that the user mostly agrees upon. Together, this idea shows us the modern persuasion trap that technology influences on how we think, but also limits what we think about reinforcing our beliefs, and critical thinking becomes harder.
These texts can also help us to understand accurate misinformation on social media. One clear example of this is during, for example, conflicts like wars or elections. These false context usually travel faster because people share that content that aligns with their beliefs or that provokes an emotion like fear or rage, even without checking it, just because the emotion that the content has. The text also explains how this content might be seen as good or maybe just as good because it has like a lot of share, a lot of a lot of views. This can help us understand why this fake content has a lot of credibility online, even if it's not accurate. However, when these issues affect us personally, like climate change, economic processes, we try and look into it deeper. So this shows us that it's not only about the false content, it's about how we process this information.